three, one, two, one, two, three, four.
Welcome, everyone. This is Joe Dager, the host of the Business 901 podcast. With me today is Ann Miltenburg. She is the founder of the company, the Brandling. As a brand developer, Ann has worked with organizations and people as diverse as tech companies, artisans, women rights activists, and bankers all over the world to help clients and workshop participants think like brand strategists. Her new book, is Brand the Change. Ann, could you hold it up there for me and show the picture of it? Okay. All right. And I'd like to start. I want to just thank you for joining me. Where are you at in this lovely scenery behind you?
Well, Joe, I'm in Nairobi, which is the capital of Kenya, where I've lived for the past few years.
I'm always inquisitive. How did the book come about? I mean, why did you write it? And just give the audience a little background.
Sure. A couple of years ago, I was working as a creative director at a big global branding agency, and I decided that I was looking for more purpose in my work. Started thinking about how could we help some really important changes in the world to actually advance more rapidly by thinking more like brand strategists. And I went on this journey to discover how could you help entrepreneurs and social enterprises, not-for-profits, people who are disrupting industries, how could you help them to build stronger brands? And so I built a couple of models and workshop formats to help people have a better understanding of branding and how they could use it for their own ventures. Quickly realized that having a workshop format and a couple of different tools and resources just simply isn't enough for people. And I realized that there's a huge market out there with all kinds of branding books. And most of them are written by branding gurus for, with examples like Nike and Apple. But for 99% of us, those examples just simply aren't really useful. First of all, the budgets are way too big. Second of all, the concepts are way too abstract, and no one really had unpacked and demystified the entire process of branding. So we decided to create that book, crowdfunded the first edition, which came out about 2 years ago. And we had an amazing group of 270 backers who sponsored that edition. Later updated it and expanded it. This is now the third edition, which has been picked up by BIS Publishers, which is a big international publisher. So that's really cool.
I have to say, I looked at the book, and, my first inclination of it is, wow, there's a lot of stuff going on here. Okay. And then I broke it down, and it's probably one of the better collections of case studies, expert advice, templates, exercises, and you did it rather seamlessly. Okay, it was very nicely done.
Thanks. Yeah, I felt that the combination of both understanding, what's a bit of the theory and the background around branding, as well as learning from other people's experiences. I find that it's often brand strategists who do the talking, where it's the people who founded the businesses themselves who have a lot of the thinking around what was their process and what went wrong and what went right. So they're really interesting to talk to. And then doing the tools and exercises just helps people to immediately put it to practice. So it's a kind of overlapping system of elements.
Yeah, and it seemed practically like a field book to me, because I didn't want to read it, okay? I wanted to use parts of it as I had as I was thinking of, I could use it over here, I could do this. And I don't know that I'll ever read it cover to cover, but I think I'll rip pages out.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think also these days the building of companies isn't so linear. And so the fact that you can just offer people a process from A to Z, but be really honest and open about the fact that if you're doing a pivot or if you're growing and scaling, you'll come at different points where you'll need different types of information. You can just kind of pick and choose whatever you want from the process.
I don't necessarily come away with it thinking, here we create this great brand, here it is, and we push it out. It's kind of like brands sort of evolve. Is there any truth to that statement?
Oh, totally. Yeah, I think it's one of those things that from the outside, things always look very polished and successful. when we talk about brands, we always use the ones that are really successful, like Apple, but that's an evolution that happens over the course of many years, and there's very few organizations that get it right from the start. And you get to know your customer better, or your client or your partners. You get to know your product better as it evolves. So it's only logical that your brand would evolve with that. So it's no longer this static delivery of like, okay, here's your strategy and your guideline, and we'll see you in 5 years. It's just not the case anymore.
Not only should my product be evolving, I should be starting with my brand in the very early stages of a startup, right?
Yeah, and what we've actually noticed is that it's really helpful to think like a brand strategist from early on, because it helps you to look at what's the actual power of this product, where does the real added value lie, and even before a product is finished, you can, by thinking about that value proposition, you can help also focus your thinking a lot more around a product. And by doing, for instance, interviews with potential customers or potential investors, you also get a better idea of what the needs are that people have in their lives. And in that sense, thinking like a brand strategist will also help you to tailor the product much more to the needs of people, hopefully making it a better product market fit.
Well, I think in your book I saw something, an old project management trick, okay, is to create a visioning box, okay, or like a cereal box where you build like a cereal box of what the product or project's going to be about.
Yes.
I think you used that a little bit in there, didn't you?
Well, one of the things that we realized is a lot of products and services people are working on are really abstract. So the exercise that I think you're referring to was this idea of let's do brainstorming around a product as if it's actually a box. People first, this is a group exercise for team. People get warmed up by talking about a soccer ball first and a coffee cup next, and then the box that is an abstraction of their product or service, and think about what, might it be, and that helps you to reframe a product or service in different ways and give you new ideas of how you could actually articulate what the product is.
Well, I guess maybe I should ask this question to begin with, okay? Is there a definition of a brand? I mean, what is our product box maybe about a brand, okay? If we had to create one.
Well, I would say the definition that we use is directing how others think and feel about you. So that's a pretty wide definition. And I think it's really important that we all realize that you will be defined by others if you don't do it yourself. And you can define how other people think about you randomly, deliberately, very consciously, and craft it in a really elaborate way. There's obviously many ways to get to the same destination. But having that awareness of the fact that you build a brand not just through a logo and, for instance, the product design or the website, but that it's about every single interaction that you have with people. Whether you see me talk on a TED stage, or you experience one of my team members in a shop giving you service regarding a product that broke, for instance, or whether you're reading through an annual report where we explain how we spent our finances. All of those are ways that we express our brand, and all of those are interactions with others, and they'll define how they think and feel about us. And if we're not aware of that, I think we're leaving something on the table.
Well, I always think a certain part of everything, marketing collateral, sales pitches, should address the brand, or at the minimum align itself with it, right? So a magic question for you here, okay, will be a tough one to answer, and I know the typical answer, it depends, okay? But, just off the cuff, what portion of a marketing budget should go to branding? I mean, should we always be investing a minimum, or, sometimes we're branding the maximum amount on it, but what should a marketing budget, can we set something there for us a little bit?
Yeah, so it really depends on what kind of market you operate. So there's organizations, for instance, that are in very competitive business to consumer markets like retail, and they sometimes reinvest 50% of their revenue into branding and marketing purely to drive the sales. Now, that's not the case for everyone. I think in the tech world, There's a lot of talk about also investing half, because if you don't acquire users enough for your product, then your product simply won't work. And therefore, you should be investing half of your time and knowledge and talent and financial resources in acquiring those users. I think, of course, there are exceptions. There's organizations that rely much more on personal relationships, in which case that percentage can be drastically lower. However, as I think the concept of branding is becoming more fluent, and it's also touching upon HR and product development and communication and even sourcing of products sometimes, it also becomes harder to determine where does the branding budget sit. So it's quite a complicated topic. I think what's really good to know for yourself is to make a difference between actual financial resources that you'll invest, having capacity on your team. So looking at the difference between manpower and things that you can do on a team without creating any external cost, having a budget for outside costs as well.
You know, everybody always wants a ROI on their marketing. You know, I hear that all the time, and I have a lot of standard answers for that. Okay, but is there an ROI kind of on a brand? I mean, can you even think that way when you're branding?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it depends a little bit on what kind of return you want to see. So you could say, well, I want to see a return in for instance, increase of sales. But we also have Cancer Support, which is a charity based in the UK. They invested a little over 100,000 pounds into branding, and it actually helped them double and almost triple their fundraising over the course of 10 years, which was purely attributed to the better positioning of the organization. And they could also prove that 50% of the people who apply for jobs are applying because of the brand, which is a really tangible value, because if you imagine that you're competing for talent all the time in the marketplace, you want the best people on your team. Obviously, having a brand that people love is a huge asset that you can't really put a financial value on, but that your HR manager, I'm sure, will be very grateful for.
And I think people have a tendency always to think about a brand as pushing out to a customer, but it's also in the hiring process, the social aspect of it, because the transparency of your brand is huge right now, and I think is only going to become more important.
Yes.
Do you see it that way?
It's all kinds of human relationships. So it's also with investors. When they talk about which brands they're investing in, are other investors actually complimenting them on those choices? They're really human drivers behind what makes someone want to be associated with your brand. There's partnerships, for instance, also with companies that rely heavily on people that supply, for instance, some of their materials. You want to be the preferred choice for people. And I think there's a heavy bias within business towards talking about branding in terms of business to consumer. But I think all those relationships are equally important for the B2B side of businesses, like people you need to hire, investors, other partnerships and suppliers.
In a more mature company, okay, can we really rebrand ourselves? Is it something similar to teaching a dog new tricks? Is it long and tedious to do it?
I think it depends if you're looking to rebrand yourself towards an audience, as in like trying to improve your reputation. I think it was Socrates who says that in order to get the reputation you want, you need to actually do what you want to be recognized for. And I think that's really important. Branding obviously isn't some cosmetic layer that you put on top of something. It's really something that people need to get behind. And that's also why in the book we created exercises that are actually team-based to help you understand better as a team, like how do we develop a brand for this? Because you can often see, in organizations as they grow, there'll be the cynics that think a brand won't do anything. And getting the cynics on board and helping them to understand how this could work, they have valuable input that could influence the brand strategy as well.
We talk a little bit about value propositions and things, and I've kind of worked more lately into this idea of a brand promise or a business promise, okay? And you touch upon the brand promise to me a little bit. Could you explain that a little bit, and then at the tail end of that, compare it to a value proposition?
Sure. I think what we try to do with the book is explain the way that branding works is really on that reputation level, and how do you weave that into everything you do. So what we decided on focusing not on the value proposition in the first part of the brand development, and do that later at the product level. So first look at the organization level, and what do you commit to deliver to your audience. And that's a little wider than just your product. It's also the experience, it's a level of quality or commitment. I think the value proposition really comes in at a different stage, at a product stage.
I like the idea of a promise because it seems more of that idea that I'm making a promise to someone. I'm collaborating with someone. This is what I'm offering, okay, rather than what I'm selling.
It helps when everyone in an organization knows on a little bit of a higher level, like what's the higher value of what you're committing to as an organization. So I think a value proposition is very product based and very much about what's the value that you're delivering to a customer. But I think in terms of committing to something as an organization, it has far-reaching consequences about, what's the quality of your buying principles, for instance, what's your ethics around hiring people, what kind of people do you work with and engage that deliver that experience to customers. So I think it's a little bit of a different game, and it helps people to understand really what their job is about.
What do you think is the future for branding? I mean, we kind of touched upon it. Will there be a stronger social and social good aspect to it, or is that just kind of that pie in the sky type stuff? Okay.
So I think businesses with purpose are obviously having a moment, and I recently got a request from a journalist from a big publication. They asked me, do you think all brands should take a stance on social issues? And I said, of course not. I only wanted them to take a stance if I agree with them. Otherwise, I think they shouldn't be doing it. What I would really be very afraid of is if we would get this world where every company is just going to schlep in some kind of cause just for the sake of looking better. I think it's really important if you want to infuse your business with purpose. I think B Corp movement and social enterprise has proven that business with purpose is a way to really build loyalty with customers and do something good and meaningful for yourself and for your team and for the people that you serve and the people who benefit. But we shouldn't confuse that with a branding or marketing mechanism, because in that case, it's just cosmetic surgery, and that's not really what the world needs.
Where do you think brands will be heading? Because, I mean, I think in this day of transparency, it might be the question, okay, how much of a brand do we actually own ourselves, okay?
Yeah.
But I mean, it's age of transparent. Are we going to lose less control of our brand? Is it going to be so transparent that our actions speak for our brand rather than us contriving this brand image?
So I think the companies that have been very successful in creating these kind of, top-down images,
iconic brands, Coke, Apple,
I think those days are past, but not necessarily because of branding, but just because of their business and their business model. I don't think these products are simply what people look to anymore for inspiration. There's such a whole different world growing out there where it's no longer cool to work at Coke or Pepsi or Unilever or any of those big companies. People want to work for the local microbrewery. They don't look so good anymore when they go to a party and explain that they work for a huge corporate as they did maybe 10 years ago. I think in that sense, brands will be more communities, which already we've seen for a couple of years. And I think that will grow and grow, and there'll be much more efforts around how do you communicate stuff that's true and real in a good way. How do you also learn to talk about things that aren't so pretty on the outside, because not everything works well. And how do you handle that? How do you have actual conversations without glossing everything over in a storytelling veneer?
You haven't invested in your brand. When a problem does arise, it's way too late, right?
Yeah, that's a very good point. No, it's totally true. And we have an exercise in the book that is about turning your reputation around. Interestingly enough, I think very often people forget that in order to get a better reputation, you actually need to change what you're doing, not just how you're perceived to be doing something. And I think these kind of different ways of thinking are important. And again, not to create some kind of cosmetic change on the outside. McDonald's, for instance, is a very good example. Interbrand a couple of years ago did a big exercise around their sustainability, and all of a sudden McDonald's is green and yellow instead of red and yellow. And I think those are ways that are extremely smart and creative, not necessarily the positive creativity that I think we should all be excited about. But that's not really what we need. I think what people want is for McDonald's, for instance, to be more sustainable and to have more ethics around animal cruelty. Think about more sustainable foods, healthy foods, instead of just, changing the interior of the restaurant and painting the windows green.
Brand the Change is the name of your new book. But tell me, what's in the future for Anne and the Brandling company?
So we have this method that we've been developing now for 3 years and iterating, and we'll continue to do so because, every time we publish a new edition, we find like 4 or 5 things that we think absolutely should be in it. So it's kind of a living document in that sense. We have a workshop format around it, and we go to incubators and accelerators and co-working spaces across the world to train people in the method. And we're currently also starting with a class 0 of training trainers, independent trainers all over the world who have gotten to know about the method and who want to train people themselves. So that's really exciting. There's an Arabic edition that's going to come out. So we're going to have Brand the Change in Arabic, which is really cool. And hopefully also in Portuguese pretty soon.
What's the best place to find out more about the book? Is there a book website, or where should I go?
If you go to the Brandling, that's the-brandling.com. This is where you can find everything about our tools and trainings. You can find the book there and where the book is for sale. So it's for sale through obviously all the big online retailers as well as specialty bookstores. There's information about the journey, what have we done to get to this point. There's my TED Talk, any other content that we've developed for the blog that didn't make it into the book. So it's a pretty good resource. And for people who are interested in potentially becoming trainers, there's also the sign-up information about the trainers program.
Oh, I think that's excellent. Now, I want to leave the listeners with one thought here. Okay, if I got the book, what would you recommend me to start on Monday morning? What would be my first step?
I would like you to talk to your team members about how do you prioritize branding, how do you make time available, and preferably within the next week or next 2 weeks, pick a spot in your calendar for about 4 hours, uninterrupted, turn off phones, close laptops, work with the brand thinking canvas that's inside the book, and really have a good brainstorm about what your brand could be in the future and how you could bring it to life.
Okay, I think that's great advice, and I want to thank you much. Okay, her company is the Brandling, and the book is Brand the Change, if I can get that out. Okay, and I wish you the best of luck with it. I wish you the best of luck with your workshops. Encourage everyone to go to the website and take a look at it. This podcast will be available on Business 901 iTunes Store and the Business 901 website. So I want to thank all the listeners for listening.